came back in 1981, decided to do this big surface collection. We didn't use an arbitrary grid. What we did was use Stuckey's map plus the McFarland Platt map. So we tried to collect by natural units that are property units in the 19th century, and looking at things like foundations or divisions that were still visible on the ground. So our collection unit number one was the Wells Fargo building behind me, and we collected things around that, found a lot of 20th century stuff. Then we came down into here, and in here, between here and the building, which we'll see in a moment, it's a Cosmopolitan restaurant. That's a replica. It's a reproduction. It's not original. There are 2 or 3 stores in here, and one was named Boyd. In fact, I have the names here: Turl, Boyd, Carter. What these were, they were local merchants. I think all of them were from Pioche, Nevada. So they all moved over here, opened either specialized store, like we'll see later, J.J. Halpin's hardware store, or general stores that served the miners. And remember, everything in Silver Reef, all the material culture is from outside. They weren't producing anything. So if they had cans or bottles, they're from not only outside, we'll see later when we're in the lab at the end of this talk, they're from the eastern United States, San Francisco, or they're from Europe. So everything was brought in from outside. So if they wanted something, they had to buy it in the stores. Now, the miners did have something which the stores wanted. They also had something that the Mormon communities wanted. The miners had cash. They were paid $4 a day, so the miners plus the middle class people, like the mine managers and others, had money. The local Mormon communities had produce. They had food. They were producing several grain crops, producing things like carrots and beets, and they were also producing cattle, producing Mormon cheeses, dairy products, and there was a good symbiotic relationship. So they brought their food stuff in here. They could sell it and get hard cash, which they didn't have in the Mormon towns. So even though there's a certain amount of hostility, because these people were Gentiles, they were not Mormons. The Mormon church sent missionaries into Silver Reef on more than one occasion. It never worked. They would open a hall to give missionary sermons, and nobody would come because the people here were Gentiles. And in a general national way, they were hostile toward Mormons. But a lot of positive relationships also developed because of this symbiotic back and forth exchange. And there's a very famous story which people in southern Utah know, that the Catholic priest who was here, Father Scanlon, wanted to do a high mass, but he didn't have people who could sing the parts of the mass. So he went to McFarland, the person who mapped this and who was a Mormon, and they worked out that, and they got permission of the hierarchy in the Mormon church to do a high mass in the tabernacle in St. George, using Mormon children to sing parts of the mass. And Father Scanlon explained the mass to all of them, and it was attended by way over 1,000 people came. It filled the whole tabernacle, which is a huge building, and that's a famous case. Scanlon later becomes the Archbishop of Utah. He's up in Salt Lake. He has very positive relationships with the Mormon community. But nationally, of course, the Mormons were under persecution by the federal government and by the general community, partially because there are a number of reasons, partially because they practiced plural marriage, and this was the Victorian period, so people were much less open-minded about those things than we are today. We don't care, but they did care. And so this is a Gentile specialized industrial town. The little towns around it, like Leeds, only a mile away, were there were irrigation agricultural towns and more traditional sort of Anglo-American towns, with some variation because the Mormon church converted people in areas like Switzerland or Scandinavia and brought them in and settled them here also. But this was much more cosmopolitan. Now you can see the foundations of 3 buildings. Again, these are these merchants along here, stone foundations, and I think all these merchants were from Pioche, Nevada. And then if we come down here, we're walking north on Main Street. And if we come down here, we're going to look at this reconstructed building behind you there. That's the Cosmopolitan Restaurant, and we know a fair amount about that. That's one of the sites we excavated. The building you're looking at, however, is a reconstruction based on period photographs and on the fact the original foundations were still there. They're gone now, but they were still there when they put the wooden reconstruction on it. So it's fairly accurate, and it actually was run not too many years ago as a restaurant again, although it's closed down now, and it makes a very convenient archaeological lab for all of our collections we're working on. So what we did is each of these will be given a number, like number 2, 3, and number 4 is the Cosmopolitan Restaurant. That's our collection unit. So we found, of course, a lot of whiteware ceramics because she was running a restaurant, and we've on the surface, and then later we excavated her backyard. So let's walk up to the restaurant, see if we can get a view. If you can maybe move back and get a view of the front of the restaurant. And again, we're passing all these walls here, These are the foundations of the merchants' stores along in here. And you can see some of them, if you look down in the back there, have little basements behind them. And way off in the distance there, you can see the walls of a house. And that was supposedly the house of Captain Lubbock, who was one of the mine managers. And it was occupied into the 20th century. That's why it's still standing. Most of these buildings between the Wells Fargo wall there and the Cosmopolitan Restaurant, and including the Cosmopolitan Restaurant, were wood frame buildings. So in fires or when they were abandoned, the whole town got recycled when it was abandoned. Local Mormon farmers came in and took the wood, took out things like the big chimneys from some of the industrial parts of the town, and used those as irrigation flumes in their irrigation systems, because everybody was gone by that point. Let's walk up to the front of the Cosmopolitan Restaurant. So you can see there are 3 buildings in here, all stores. And then we may want to switch out. Do you want to move out front?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's jump out there.
Let's see. Well, you go first, and I'll follow you.
All right.